Hey TYT, I'm Nomiki Konst here in Washington, D.C. at we've just decided is the global headquarters of the movement, aka Our Revolution's headquarters in Washington, D.C. And we're here with Erika Andiola, who is the political director, the national political director for Our Revolution. She is always on CNN, always making a case for the great work that Our Revolution is doing, but she's been an activist for many years and joined the Bernie Sanders campaign and worked as national press secretary, Latino outreach coordinator, I believe, and is now here at Our Revolution. But you may have seen a couple of the videos of her in the last few days go viral, where she was arrested in front of Trump Tower, demonstrating against Donald Trump, the president, on his DACA decision. And that is because, well, for many reasons, but also Erika has been a vocal dreamer out there on the front lines. And first thing, thank you for joining us. I know you're exhausted, but can you tell us a little bit about what led up to the events at Trump Tower, how long this had been in the works?
Yeah, of course. So, for us, in the Dreamer movement, there's always, been a strategy that we have used for many years, which is, how do we change the narrative in the American public? How do we change the narrative even within the media on how they talk about immigrants and the undocumented community? And for us to be able to do that, we had to come out of the shadows. We had to be bold. We had to be courageous, and, come out as undocumented. And, there has been escalating to a point where Dreamers were starting to risk arrest, and it escalated to even, winning DACA. That's how we won DACA in the very first place. And so for us, thinking of how Trump was going to take away DACA, and that was the most likely scenario, we thought, we have two choices to go back into the shadows and, just try to figure out how do we live our daily lives, or step it up and tell Trump, we're here, we're still unafraid, and we're not going to back down. And so, that action wasn't necessarily for Trump to hear us. That action, for the most part, was for the community to hear us, and for the community to really understand that right now it's not about backing down. It's about, showing courage at this moment.
So walk us through the events that occurred that day and what it means to be arrested in New York City in front of Trump Tower. As somebody who is undocumented, I mean, this is a very important point to make. It's not just that you were arrested. You're arrested with your rights on the line in this period, this unknown period.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of us really have been inspired by, current, past movements, the civil rights movement, thinking of a lot of leaders in the past who have really showed courage and risked it all in order to show, that there is a moral argument to be made, that there is a moral dilemma, right? And I think for undocumented folks, being afraid of the police, being afraid of law enforcement, even going to jail or going to a detention center is the scariest thing that you can think of, right? Not being able to come back home because you're going to get detained. And so, for a lot of us who are just really just fed up with everything that they're doing to us, the best way to show, right, that we're now really resisting, and this is the word that has been thrown around since, Trump won. But I think for a lot of Dreamers and for a lot of our families, resistance is this is the actual, real meaning and definition of resistance, and saying, yes, I can be deported, but I'm willing to put myself in the line right now to show that I am a human being and that I don't, I shouldn't be deported. And they didn't, they didn't deport us, and we're here. And I think that really showed a lot of Dreamers right now a little bit of hope in a terrible time.
800,000 Dreamers, possibly even more, risk being deported. And since DACA, these 800,000 people have also given their information to the government and shared, kept them up to date on where they're living, what their employment is, bank accounts. I mean, there's a whole list of issues here. And now there's a fear that Donald Trump is going to use this information to track down those who are undocumented and potentially deport them. Is there any word on, number one, blocking this? Like, we should just, the state of affairs where we stand. You're a political director, so you're dealing with this head on. But also, I mean, pushback on that specific issue alone seems very scary. Mm-hmm. Police state.
Yeah. So, I think for us, there is that fear, right, that if they decide after the 6-month period that Trump gave that they want to completely just get rid of any protection. Because right now, for those 6 months, we still have a lot of dreamers who do have a work permit. I mean, my work permit and my DACA ends or expires in a year and a half, so I have a year and a half of protection. But I think for us, what we're fearing or what we're worried about the most is the fact that they're trying to use this as political leverage, and this meaning dreamers and our vulnerability under this circumstances, to try to push for more enforcement, to try to push for, basically the argument and the narrative has been from them and even from Democrats. Both Republicans and Democrats have used dreamers as a sort of a sweetener, right, for anything. And for us, it's very frustrating because obviously, I've been able to help my family by having a job now that I can work legally. And so it helps my family, but at the same time, I know that just me being legalized and having the rest of my community being in danger of deportation or detention or criminalization, it's also going to affect me. And they don't understand that, right? It's not just about the dreamers. It's about 11 million people who are currently in danger of deportation.
And there's children who were born in the United States who could lose their parents. It breaks apart homes. It breaks apart communities. It breaks apart the business. I mean, the business community even. I mean, there's a lot of pushback. I was at Congress yesterday talking about this issue with Representative Gallego in Arizona, and I ran into some people from an industry in Arizona who wouldn't normally align with the Democrats on issues, but said, our business model depends on using DACA recipients because they're just working within Tucson, Arizona, for instance. I mean, you're from Arizona. There is so much influx from people who come from Mexico, documented, undocumented. It is part of the vibrant economy of Arizona, Texas, Nevada, California. The consequences are severe. So my question to you in regards to that is, when you're working with Congress and you're trying to lobby and push back on Democrats and Republicans who maybe were open to immigration reform, who are they listening to? Are they listening to the base, the business community? I mean, where do all these lines stand?
I think what I can say is who they should be listening to, right? And I think, unfortunately, on the side of sort of Trump and his administration and the people that are with him, they have not been able, in my view, to make a good argument of in what way undocumented folks have a negative impact in the economy. They just can't, because even the business community is on our side. So they have been, instead of that, using fear tactics, getting people to believe, and the American public to believe that undocumented folks are either rapists or, the Muslim community, is going to come and do all kinds of crazy things here. And I mean, it's just sort of like fear tactics that these folks have been using in order for people to be divided and to fear, the other sort of the undocumented folks in the immigrant community. But I think, for me or for a lot of folks in the movement right now, what's important is when this goes to Congress, to understand that it's not just Republicans who are willing to, to pass something on the DREAM Act and at the same time put enforcement on there. It has also been...
Hang on a second. Before you get to that, explain what with enforcement means.
Yeah, of course. With enforcement, I think a lot of folks don't really understand the enforcement side, but, at the beginning of this year, we started hearing a lot about the raids, people being raided by immigration. We started hearing in Texas and a couple of other states, there's more private prisons being built. There's more prisons that are being basically made so that families can live there, right? And by families, I mean children and mothers and fathers. And so, those kinds of either building private prisons, getting more ICE agents hired that are not needed, giving them more power at the local level to go and arrest people, right, with absolutely no reason to arrest them but their color of their skin. So there's a lot of different policies and laws that they have been pushing, which also includes getting rid of sanctuary cities, getting rid of sanctuary states. And so all of this is what we call enforcement, right? And what unfortunately that has caused, even under the Obama administration, has been unjust deportations, more people being incarcerated, more people being detained, and at the end of the day, more families being separated. And so for us, those families are the families that DACA recipients are integrated into, that citizens are integrated into, right? And so they're not they're not really given the right narrative. And like I said, unfortunately, both sides of the, both parties have been sort of digging, or they have been pushing this narrative that, dreamers are sort of like the good immigrant, right? And that there's also the bad immigrant. But those bad immigrants, unfortunately, sort of that definition extends to people that are just undocumented folks like my mother and my siblings.
You mentioned that it's not just the Republicans, it's also the Democrats. What's happening right now? I mean, when you have so many people showing up protesting on the streets for everything that Donald Trump is doing, but the last week it was so outrageous what he did that it almost became a weapon that Democrats were using against him, and I wonder. I mean, at this point, is when you say that they might pass the DREAM or continue to have the DREAM Act, but add other programs to it or latch it onto something else. What are the political games that are being played aside from this message game, the message wars?
Right. So the issue right now is that, there are folks who have already introduced, legislation. So there's already there's a DREAM Act version in the Senate, there's a DREAM Act version in the House. And there's a lot of people that are throwing their support behind that because there is a threat. There's a real threat of ending DACA. Or, I mean, they already ended it basically, but, those 6 month period, that 6 month period that people are waiting for. And so in the meantime, you have people in the Democratic side that have been pushed by undocumented folks, by DACA people, by some of the sort of groups on the left, asking them, do not take anything else but a clean dream bill. Right. Let's start with that. Let's make sure that, whatever negotiations are happening and whatever conversations are happening, the Democrats come to the table saying, we want the DREAM Act by itself. They want to add more legalization, great. Add ag jobs for agricultural workers or anything that could support more undocumented folks. But in this Trump administration, the most likely scenario would be that Republicans are going to want to attach all kinds of things like getting rid of sanctuary cities or, putting more money into the wall, which is definitely not needed at this point, or building more private prisons, etc. So for us, we want to make sure that there's also a push not just on Republicans to pass the DREAM Act, but also on Democrats to make sure that they are listening to the DACA recipients that are saying right now, don't use us. We're not a bargaining chip. We're human beings. We have families. We didn't grow from trees. We have mothers, we have fathers who are here. And it would be a shame that they start these conversations without listening to those that are most affected.
Who are the Democrats right now that you're concerned about?
I mean, historically, it has been mostly in the Senate. Schumer in 2013, when we were, trying to pass comprehensive immigration reform, Schumer was one of those people who were, easily given, sort of given into more enforcement for.
So strange, because he was part of the Gang of Eight.
He was part of the Gang of Eight, but Schumer was also one of the Democrats that has received the most money from private prisons, and so for a lot of us, it wasn't. I'm really pleased, and I have a lot of gratitude towards Bernie for bringing up this whole private prison problem, right? But at that time, a lot of people were not paying attention to what private prisons were doing to immigrants. And a lot of us were already protesting Schumer, asking him to stop, taking so much enforcement and adding so much enforcement into CIR, which is comprehensive immigration reform, just for, to be able to legalize more people. And so for us, it's like with many other issues, we have been pushing Democrats to really be bold and progressive and really try to use and build more political power to get what we want. This is the same thing that we're trying to push for this issue, right? Like, we cannot start these conversations with saying, well, we're going to have to take some bad stuff. We have to start these conversations with, empowerment and trying to really figure out how we can get the DREAM Act as clean or just clean, a bill that's just going to pretty much take care of the problem that was created by Trump this past week.
you mentioned Schumer taking private prison money, and that makes me wonder. There is a movement even among Republicans. The Koch brothers have called for prison reform. I question their agenda and what that means to them versus, because I think there's always a business opportunity attached. But because of that, do you find yourself thinking there may be unusual allies on the Republican side who you might be able to pull in for votes who would distance themselves for Trump for the same reasons?
I mean, there's already Republicans that have come out, in support of the DREAM Act on its own. And so, I think at this point, like I said, the DREAM Act has been a bipartisan issue since the very beginning. Senator Lugar, who's no longer there, was one of the, first co-sponsors together with Senator Durbin. I mean, Senator Lugar, despite, being almost, threatened to basically lose his seat, he was like, I'm going to support the Dreamers. And he supported a standalone bill for many, many years. And so at this point, there is both Democrats and Republicans that have come out in support of the DREAM Act. And so, we're really asking those members of Congress, especially in the Senate, where Democrats have more power, to hold a line. And so, you can expect a lot more pressure being built on Schumer to make sure that he does just that, hold a line on DREAM as a clean bill.
I mean, it will look bad if you have a couple of Republican senators who are willing to stand up to Trump because, the Koch brothers are behind them for whatever reason. They're from the Southwest. They've stood for the DREAM Act prior. It's just going to look bad. I mean, more than anything, shame is a very powerful tool when dealing with lawmakers. And if you suddenly find yourself negotiating with Republicans who are being more open-hearted than your own leading Democrats, that can't look good. So in terms of where you go from here, there's, I'm sure, a very complicated strategy. But, for our viewers who are tapped into this movement, who want to know more about what they can do, what our revolution's doing, maybe give some folks some guidance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, right now, what we have to make sure that we, keep in our minds is that there's a 6-month period that has been given, right, by Trump. And right now, it's really a moment of urgency. And we also have to understand that there has been many polls, done, even within Trump supporters, that most of them actually support the DREAM Act, so they support some sort of legalization for Dreamers. And so we have to come, very strong, understanding that there is a lot of support for this and continue to make those calls to Congress, calling for a clean dream. And really, folks who don't necessarily have a good understanding of who a dreamer is or what DACA recipient, I think it's, right now it's a good time to start, learning a lot more about it and talking to your friends and your, community members about this. With our revolution, we have been sending emails and calls to action to make sure that people are calling Congress. There's a lot of organizations that are right now asking folks to go, in their own home states to lobby their members when they go back home. And, right now, since they are in Washington, D.C., calls are super, super important. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, I think for me, or, for folks who are watching, that's the easiest thing that you can do. But if you are somebody who knows an undocumented person, I think right now is the time to reach out to them. There's a lot of attacks coming our way. Psychologically, it's really hard to know that, you're being attacked in so many directions. And so, this is a good time to make sure that, folks who are in your community who are undocumented feel that they have the support and that they feel like they're not alone in this moment.
On a similar note, if somebody's undocumented or comes from a family that is affected by undocumented, family members, dealing with law enforcement has always been a fear. But say there's a reason to go to law enforcement over something, anything, typical. Your car was broken into. You get pulled over by, for running a red light. Now that there is this in this questionable period of 6 months, how do you kind of encouragement, reinforcement can you give folks so that they feel okay to go to law enforcement? Is it okay?
Many times it just depends where you live. It's a very local issue, and unfortunately, there's places in this country where you call the police and you end up deported. There's places in this country where you call the police and you end up getting killed. If you are a black person or a brown person, right? And so it's really difficult for people of color to know how to interact with the police. But I think that it's important for people to have a plan. For always, it's you never know what can happen. You never know if they're gonna come knocking on your door or if you're gonna get stopped, while you're driving. But it's also, it's crucial to have a plan, to have an attorney in mind, to make sure that you know your rights, right? That, if you are in the need of calling the police for anything, that you understand that you also have rights, even though you're not a citizen. You don't have to disclose the information that otherwise, you don't have to disclose information beyond your name in many of these instances. So it's important for people to know that. And it's also important for lawmakers right now who live in those sort of progressive states like California right now, to start making sure that those sanctuary bills are being, pushed forward. Right now, California is fighting for, Brown to sign this freaking bill that has already been, through the Senate, through the Assembly, that would make sure that law enforcement is not asking for legal status. There's many cities that can do the same. And so I think right now politically also it's important for Democrats to put their foot down in all the cities to protect undocumented immigrants by actually passing, sanctuary bills and getting the police to stop acting like ICE.
So lobby your Democratic lawmakers to make sure that you have sanctuary cities in place. I will lobby on camera right now for New York because we would love to have sanctuary cities, but there are 8 Democrats who are caucusing with the Republicans, preventing that from being passed in the Senate. So call Governor Cuomo and ask him to have a sanctuary state. Oh, we have one question from the audience. Erika, can you talk about your recent march from Charlottesville to D.C., which got a lot of coverage? And was extraordinary, an extraordinary event, a grueling event. So yeah, how was that experience?
Yeah, it just feels like that was like a month ago.
No, that's why I'm like 2 days ago.
I know, it was totally 2 days ago. There was an effort that was put together by, sort of a coalition of organizers that were really just, we were all together at Netroots when everything happened in Charlottesville.
Netroots Nation is a conference of progressive organizations and activists. Yeah,
we were, basically gathering, and we heard the news. I think a lot of people were really, angry. And so, this sort of came together organically. Working Families Party was actually one of the organizations that was, really sort of at the forefront of this. And it was the most, the message is when you hear Charlottesville to DC, I think most people can actually know what it's about. It's really making sure that we are continuing that conversation that would happen in Charlottesville, that march of or white supremacists going out there, Nazis, all these people coming out on the streets. It's not just a one-day event that happened and when somebody actually got killed by one of these people. This is something that has to continue being talked about in the media. It has to continue to be really in conversations, and also making sure that we are holding people accountable in the White House, or that we are actually getting rid of white supremacy in the White House. And so what that's what the march was about. We got amazing people coming out to march with us. Mark Ruffalo was also there. We had amazing organizers joining us. And they're now here. Everyone, we left a little bit earlier. I left a little bit earlier from the march because we had to go prepare for the DACA protest. But everyone.
And this was on her vacation time, guys.
Totally vacation time. But there's folks are gonna continue to protest here in DC. There's some plans to have a sustained action here in DC from the same people, the same organizers and activists who marched to DC. And again, it's very simple. We need to get rid of white supremacy in our government. And you probably know who is the main head of that right now. And so we need to make sure that he's out of there as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Erika, keep us in the loop. Thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you guys for watching. I'm Nomiki Konst with TYT.